Hello and welcome to the Ea Tolkien Society. I'm founder Hawk Robinson. We are here in Spokane, Washington, broadcasting to you live this November 20th, 2021. And today we have one of our special topics today is going to be about Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time. Of course, we're all about Tolkien, so we'll have to make sure we compare and contrast and tie it in and all of that. And we have some our usual and new members participating. Let's go next to our secretary for our. We are an official Ea Tolkien or official UK Tolkien Society SMEAL. Our website's tolkienscholars.org, and we stream on youtube.com/Tolkien Scholars. Generally every third Saturday from 1 to 3 p.m. Pacific time. Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Hawk, and welcome to all of you, to you and Corey and Anthony there, and Gary and Drake and others who might be listening. I believe Sarah in Italy is going to be following us on YouTube.
Okay.
So hopefully she'll have some comments there as well.
Yeah, she usually has connection challenges, so that's sometimes a way to do it.
So I'll go ahead and read the notes if that's okay with you.
If you would, please, sir.
Okay, so our last meeting was October 16th.
Well, actually, just before you do, everybody else needs a chance to introduce themselves.
Oh, yes, go ahead. That's fine. I'm Brian Huseland. I'm the secretary of the SMILE.
Hello, I'm Anthony of the East Farthing, and I've been part of Tolkien Society for about over 4.5 years now, almost.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm Corey, and the psychologist told me to come to these meetings.
Okay.
Well, it's therapeutic.
Has it helped?
Yes, actually, I'm very thankful for my my friendship with Brian and Anthony and
Oh, wonderful.
Richard.
Excellent.
But
we don't see
each
each other much.
before, yeah. They meet outside of this, so.
Oh yeah, I did too.
But
if this therapy doesn't work, though, Corey, the next step is death therapy.
What therapy?
death therapy, did you say? From What About Bob?
Oh,
You familiar with What About Bob?
what about Bob?
I'm all tied up. Yes.
And if I don't untie the knots, I'm going to explode. I'm cured, doctor. I'm cured.
Yes.
What'd you do with the packages, Bob? Put them in the house. Boom. All right.
Sorry about that. Who's next?
Joining us online.
And I'm Gary, and I recently moved from Anacortes, Washington to Mountain Home, Idaho. And we're pretty much embedded here now. And so, this is what, the second or third meeting that I've been able to attend. 3. Okay. Well, I'm glad you're keeping track.
We are so glad to have you join us
Yep, well,
in the poll.
Is Spokane the closest that you can get from Idaho?
There is not another active Tolkien Society for
Really?
states in multiple directions. Not even Seattle has an active Tolkien
Really?
Society, right?
That's
No,
They used to.
Impressive. Good job.
I checked it out when I was in Anacortes, and somehow I found you guys. So, I'm happy to be here. The third Saturday of the month for a couple hours, and it's actually more productive than a lot of things I do. So,
Well, welcome. We're really glad to have you.
thank you.
Then my youngest son, Drake, is trying to join. Jitsy's giving
I'm
trouble.
doing
Oh,
it.
you got it. Okay, good. I'm going to hang up the phone then. Hi, Drake. Say hi.
I'm Hawk's youngest. I'm born in Salt Lake, raised in Spokane, and now I live in Butte, Montana. I like Tolkien's work. However, Robert Jordan's works are probably my favorite fantasy series of all time.
Yeah, so that's why we really needed to have him here.
Yeah.
He's read all of them, and he attended some of the Brandon Sanderson writing workshops when he was here and at Spokane and such.
Wow.
Got to meet him. So he was very excited. He was a little. You were, what, 12 then or something?
14, I thought.
14? Okay. Well, I think there was more than once. I think twice you got to.
There was twice, but I think both times I had already written a novel.
Okay. Right, he wrote his own little 80,000 word
Wow.
novel legend.
Great to have you with us, Gary and Drake.
Yeah. So he probably, so as we are about Tolkien, he is about Brandon Sanderson.
And Robert Jordan.
And Robert Jordan. I mean, well, both. Yeah. So really helpful to have him in this discussion.
Well, we didn't hear from him. Does he think Brandon Sanderson was the one that should have taken over?
We'll get into all of that. So Brian, now go ahead and go over the notes, and then we'll jump into the conversation.
Yes.
And Sarah's
One
watching
final-
from
one final
Italy.
comment. Sorry. Go ahead.
Sarah says hello on our YouTube channel from Italy. We're really glad
Very
you're,
good.
Hello, Sarah.
we always appreciate when
Hello.
you can join. It's close to midnight where she is, and bandwidth can be a challenge, so she can't always make it into the meeting room. But we're so glad that she's joined the stream. So I'll be watching the chat room for her to post anything. So I'll be her voice and such.
Very good. And hope I don't know if Christine might also be able to drop in. He was hoping to, but we'll see whether or not he can attend online, or at least on the YouTube. So,
And
also, quick note on Gary's home. I think Mountain Home is about one of the most Tolkien-esque kind of names I
Yeah.
can think of.
Yeah.
other than Rivendell,
Yeah, but if I have to revert back to, I don't know, the scenery in Peter Jackson's movies, I can't imagine it being actually Tolkien-esque.
No.
We're high desert and sagebrush
okay.
and sagebrush and
Oh, I see. It's a transcription error. Should have read Mordor Home.
yeah. Well, it's not as bad as Mordor.
Oh, okay.
is Mountain Home like midway? Like what part of Idaho is that? Is it in the Panhandle or down?
It's 40 miles southeast of Boise on I-84.
Oh, there. Oh, okay. Yeah. So between
it's
there
a great
and
place to drive through.
I don't.
Ow.
I
Okay.
mean that nicely.
Careful.
Yeah.
The scenery is nice.
Yeah.
So is the roads.
Been past it many times.
Yeah, me too, I think.
Well, and you're not far then, Gary. You're not far then from the Grand Tetons. Then I would assume. I mean, a couple hours away.
No, I'm looking forward to going over there. My wife and I will.
You know where Chalice and Stanley are?
No, I do not.
Okay, those are very small towns up in, like, Stanley's right there, right at the base of the Sawtooths. And between
Okay.
Chalice and Stanley, there's a little place called Sunbeam, population like 90, and there's a dredge museum. And if you take that road and some switchbacks, up there is the Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness, the second largest wilderness in the country. And the largest being the Mojave Desert and all.
I've been to the Mojave in August.
Yeah.
It's something I wouldn't recommend.
No, this is lovely. I mean, you don't want to go in the winter; it's 120 feet of snow, and you can't really get up there till May, June, July because of the snow.
Uh-huh.
But go up there in the summer. I grew up working in a mine up there. The family still has land up there, about 8,000 feet above sea level, and it's just beautiful wilderness, wonderful. So if you're looking for that kind of area, check it out.
Yeah.
They call it mine.
Does your family still have the mine, and is there any gold in it?
Yeah. They ceased operations again. It's kind of an on again, off again thing. At this point, it's a bunch of cabins and such. But there's 10 drift mines, so those are horizontal mines, and then 1 or 2 are only accessible through interconnecting shafts. They're not strip mines, and right now they're all closed up for safety reasons. But it's been open and closed for more than a century. It opened up in the late 1800s, and I grew up working summers there, so a lot of great experiences.
Yeah, I got friends up in Coeur d'Alene and someplace just east of there. So.
Okay, yep,
And
that's close to here.
They're refugees from Anacortes also. So.
Okay. Okay.
As far as east from here, I don't have anybody I know up in the Tetons.
Okay.
I saw the-
Yeah, do not go in the winter. Stanley's got one of the records in the country for one of the coldest places on Earth at one point. I think it's been broken since. But yeah, let's go and read the notes.
Yeah.
Get to know each other.
2021. Gary, Hawk, Anthony, and Brian attended, and I think Corey probably came in a little bit afterwards. So Brian read September notes. The topic to discuss starting last month was to choose a high fantasy author every month to compare and contrast with Tolkien in order to just make it more interesting. Not necessarily really about saying who's better, but going deeper than that. Kind of looking at as we kind of put out the idea of looking at authors who were influenced by Tolkien and then perhaps went their own direction. And then when we get through some of these, then we'll look at the idea was to look at authors who were living at the same time as Tolkien, and then we'll go back to authors who influenced Tolkien in the future. So last month, as it in our notes, we chose to start with Brandon Sanderson. And so there was a link in the notes to an FAQ article that I read from. And so we had a discussion about this and a lively debate of whether Sanderson is right in his point that he says Tolkien was great at what he did, and in order to continue to write great fantasy, one needs to be original rather than kind of using the same categories that he does. So we had that debate. We talked about a comparison of epic fantasy with sci-fi, and how sci-fi is branched out more, but has its own tropes as well, such as time travel. But there really isn't the same kind of sense of one kind of dominating, kind of not dominating. That's the wrong term. Tolkien really be offended at that. Great, like key influential figure who kind of everybody would then refer to, either in saying, well, I'm nothing like this person, or yes, I'm the next Tolkien. You don't have the same thing we were saying with sci-fi as much, although that's obviously open to debate as well, but it's less so. And then that led to the question: is epic fantasy too bound by its own past, i.e., a medieval setting? And then so we talked about what is the dream motivating us. Fantasy would be to make the world more real to us through exploration of a fantastical realm. Um, Fantasy also compared or contrasted with historical fiction and how that is very different. And so we explored themes like nobility, tragedy, heroism, and beauty, which often the four of those are part of fantasy. And can't remember who recommended this, but The Accursed Kings by Maurice Druon.
Yes, the fiction or set of historical.
Right. Yes.
Actually,
Right. Thank you. Good.
that was kind of a big influence on Song of Ice and Fire.
Okay.
I think j.r.r. talked about how fantasy and historical fiction are cousins, because much fantasy has, of course, evil setting and and tropes like that. So
Got it. Thank you very much, Anthony.
oh, you're welcome.
And then we decided last month that the logical next author to discuss would be Robert Jordan, since there was the natural connection with Sanderson. And then we had so then we read the next letter of J.R.R. Tolkien. We've been reading for many years now, at least one letter, sometimes two or three letters of Tolkien as part of the core of our meeting to hear from his perspective at the time. So Corey read letter 191, and we had a discussion on this. And we also referred to the recent publication of The Nature of Middle-earth by Carl Hofstetter, and looking at the underpinnings of Tolkien's work. Then Anthony read letter 192, which refers to Frodo's failure at the end to cast the ring into the cracks of doom. And he refers to pity, mercy, and forgiveness of injury as being the three things that actually, even though he failed, these three things actually preserved Gollum, who then is the agent who ends up carrying out the destruction of the ring unwittingly. And so just a little note there, double checking on quote of pity, mercy, and forgiveness of injury. The pity would be Bilbo's pity, as found in The Hobbit when he he chose not to kill Gollum when he had the ring on. He showed pity to him. And then Gandalf references that, of course, in the Lord of the Rings. Secondly, mercy would be Sam's mercy on Gollum, because outside Mount Doom, Gollum tackles Sam, or he tackles Frodo, trying to get the ring. Sam beats him off, and Frodo goes up while Sam and Gollum kind of square off. And Sam considers killing Gollum at that point, but he actually tells him to go away, and he gives him the chance. So that's Sam's mercy there. And finally, the third thing is forgiveness of injury, which refers to the fact that in Frodo being injured by Gollum at the end, that Frodo is willing to forgive that, and that these three things, pity, mercy, and forgiveness, actually preserve Frodo from, in other words, it's a nobleman theme that we were talking about, that he, though he failed, is still a hero. And then we set the next meeting to be today, November 20, 2021. These are the notes.
Thank you very much, Brian. Appreciate that.
What have we learned? Oh, sorry. Old song.
All right. So, Brian, how do you want to start this?
I think what would be wise is that we start each of these with a person who is very well informed about the author to give a short, a brief kind of, this is why I like this author. Because it's helpful to not set up a straw man, but to really give, to do a just and fair job here. After that brief kind of description of what this author is like, and what they've written, because to be honest with you, I've only read The Eye of the World, and so there's a lot here that I don't know, and there's probably a few of us as well that have not read all of Robert Jordan's books. So for those of us who don't know, it'd be helpful. Secondly, I think then what would be wise is for us to answer the question, is there any noticeable influence on this author by Tolkien? Yes or no? And then I think then the rest of the discussion would just be comparing and contrasting and saying, how is this different? Because every author is going to have their own strengths and weaknesses, and be able to connect to people in different ways. So, I mean, those are my suggestions, but I'm totally open to other people's ideas.
So let's give Drake a chance to kind of give the most experienced with it. Drake, you want to talk a little bit about it?
Absolutely. Are you looking for a synopsis on the author or the novels?
That's a great question. I think, Drake, what I want to do is I don't want us to jump right into they're nothing the same, or oh yes, they're very similar. I want you to give a picture of what he's like as a writer. What kinds of I mean, you can refer. I don't know what else Jordan has written. I mean, obviously he's best known for Wheel of Time. So if you want to speak about Wheel of Time, you can, but mainly it would be a chance to help us understand, is he a very descriptive writer like Tolkien is?
Right, absolutely.
Is he, just give us kind of a big picture idea of, for those of you, basically for people, assume that we don't know anything, even though we might know a little bit about Jordan. Obviously, I mean, he's well known for writing a long series of books, and that's kind of key to his, as I understand it, barely. The mythology or the legendarium is that there is a sense of time. So maybe you could just help us out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll touch on Jordan briefly and give a brief overview of the novels.
Great.
So Robert Jordan, that's not his real name. I don't ever remember his real name, unfortunately. But it's his pen name. He passed away out of completing the 11th of 13 planned novels. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Okay. James Oliver Rigney Jr. Yep.
Okay.
So he has written other works. I have not read them, unfortunately, given that The Wheel of Time really was his ultimate and of sorts. It really was his baby, of a sense. He, as an author, tends to, at least as far as I'm aware, writes in limited third-person viewpoints, which is something I've noticed. I've noticed, at least in the Silmarillion, particularly, it is a much more third-person, omniscient perspective for storytelling.
Right.
So that's a contrast there. The series of books is following three young men who, well, let me back up a bit. The setting is deeply set in the ideas of reincarnation and essentially the turning of this wheel of time. Everything that has happened before will happen again. Everyone that's been born will be born again. The first novel did, yes. That he was running a D&D campaign of some variety. He was running for his sons, I believe. But he obviously took that and went much further than just the campaign. Yeah. Absolutely.
Oh, wow.
How many books?
Sure. So Robert Jordan completed 11 of 13 planned novels, I believe. There's 15. Okay, I wasn't sure if it was 14 or 15.
He wrote 11. I wasn't saying.
Yeah. So he also penned a prequel called New Spring, which follows two major characters before the story really gets going. And after Jordan passed away, his wife Harriet was trying to figure out, does she just leave it as it is? Does she find someone to finish it? What does she do? She was also his editor, so she was deeply involved in how these stories were made.
Interesting.
So Sanderson at one point, and I don't remember too accurately how this happened, but Sanderson and Harriet stumbled into each other at a convention or some sort of writers' meeting of some variety. And much, much later, eventually, Harriet and Sanderson got in touch, and Sanderson made it clear just how influential the Wheel of Time was on him growing up and as a writer, and just how much he loves the series and would hate not to see it finished. And so Harriet talked to some other folks about Sanderson as a writer. He was still pretty much a fledgling writer at the time. He'd done Mistborn by that point in Elantris. And so they got together and talked it over, and eventually they decided that Sanderson would finish it. Most definitely. To put it in perspective, The Wheel of Time and Game of Thrones, before Game of Thrones was turned into a television series, were similar in popularity. Their fans would kind of argue back and forth a lot about whose is better. Very similar sales numbers. What was that? Yeah. Yeah, but there was a lot of back and forth between the two sides of that group of folks that enjoy epic fantasy. So up until the televisation of Game of Thrones.
All right, let's let the speaker continue.
So to put that's sort of the sales perspective you can have, because Game of Thrones was reasonably popular, but nothing like it became. And so I personally think that Sanderson, though having a very different flow to his stories and being much more focused than Jordan, I think he was probably the right author to finish it as far as modern fantasy authors. Honorary professor. He teaches. Yeah. Yep.
Is that Ocon?
Yes. And WorldCon.
Oh, okay.
I don't know why. Oh, I know what it is.
Us getting
No,
right.
no.
I mean, it
I
sounds
don't
like
think that's.
I get to finish your stories. Please.
Yes.
For
I'll
my
pretend
whole
it
reason
out.
I write. So just give you.
No, no. Jordan passed before his wife
I thought there
settled
was all
on.
kinds of.
There may have been, but there was no clear decision for quite
No,
some
no, I know they
time.
didn't make this.
Sanderson hadn't come up in that conversation. Yes.
Okay, so you wrote 11 books right now.
I believe so. Possibly 12.
So,
in that range.
Right. That's quite a bit of output.
All right, I will give a synopsis of the story. Spoiler warning for those that
Spoilers.
want to read it.
Spoiler.
Massive spoilers. And then I'll get to the Tolkien comparisons because there are actually quite a few.
Okay.
So the story.
Yeah, it's hard to hear any side comments. It's really hard for me to hear right now. So if you can keep the side comments to a minimum until there's a natural break point where we have discussion, please.
Okay, I'll just carry on then. So general synopsis, and this won't be completely accurate, but it'll be to the best of my verbal abilities.
That's good enough.
Yeah. So the central thing to the story is this struggle between good and evil, and then basically just fate. And there is a being called the Dark One, or Shaitan, as Jordan sometimes wrote him. And he is literally malice and evil incarnate, and doesn't believe in free will and all of these things. And it's not that he wants to turn the world necessarily into some horrible place where everyone is miserable and has no quality of life, but it's rather he wants to take away all control and freedom and the ability to self-determine. Opposing this, about I believe it's 1,000 years before the beginning of the stories, are many people who are believing good and freedom and come from this golden age of humanity. Central to this is a thing called the One Power, which is split into two parts: Saidin and Saidar. Saidin is the male half, Saidar is the female half. And so they go to war with the Dark One, and in the end, the men decide to try to seal the Dark One into a prison, which they can't do without women effectively, but they do it anyways. Saidin is corrupted by the Dark One's taint. Everyone who channels the male half goes insane, destroys the world. And then there's Luce Theron, the dragon, as he was called, who is eventually killed. Fast forward 1,000 years, we go to the Two Rivers, where there are three boys, Rand, Matt, and Perrin. Rand is the dragon reborn, and quite literally is the reincarnation of the Theron character. an Aes Sedai, which is basically a female channeler of the One Power, finds them, whisks them away, and they go through a journey of very many things. And Rand discovers he's the Dragon Reborn, and then begins trying to unite everyone to defeat the Dark One. Eventually he does, and eventually they win. That is the briefest summary I think I can give in under 5 minutes.
Does it take? Does that cover all 11 books that he wrote before his death, Drake, or is that just the first book?
That is the entire series. The first book is just them. Oh man, it's been a while since I've read it. But the core of that story is sort of the beginning of understanding who Rand is, and that sort of discussion.
And are these three characters you were talking about? These 3 boys, are they throughout the books, or are they just in kind of like they just like is there a big span of time in between the books?
Most of the books flow one into the next with very little time between them. It takes place over about 3 years, I believe. And the other 2 are essential to the survival of Rand, and they're very important characters, but they are not the savior of the world in a sense.
But the Dragon Reborn is.
Yes.
Okay.
So Jordan goes off, because I'm not familiar with him. Jordan goes off on all kinds of tangents, and during the 15 books that were written.
Yes, it is a very broad, sweeping story across dozens of different character perspectives.
Oh
God!
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So Drake, that was really helpful. Thank you. That helps me a great deal, because I was unclear on some of those things. Yeah. So go ahead and tell us a little bit more about, I guess, about the influence. Do you see some Tolkien influences there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jordan has had here and there talked about some influences. There are monsters called Trollocs, which are these beastly humanoids with beaks, ram's horns, claws, hooves, etc. Just twisted monsters. And they were Jordan's version of orcs, quite literally. The idea of this overarching good versus evil narrative was something I believe inspired by Tolkien, or at least a parallel. Let's see. The Dark One would tie into either Morgoth or Sauron pretty directly. He is that overarching evil character through the novels. I don't know. There's lots of parallels, and it's hard to think them up on the spot without sort of more of a dynamic to it.
And ultimately, Aes Sedai Dragon Reborn magic on Aes Sedai had a tendency
Moraine.
idea better if but every dangerous worse than Dark One.
There was this sort of divide among the Aes Sedai of, we have to have the Dragon Reborn to not be wiped out by the Dark One, but does he need to be able to channel to do that? Because they could stop him being able to channel, no problem. Oh, sorry if you guys can hear that. I live downtown. So there was this big sort of conflict between Aes Sedai on whether or not to cage and just, sort of keep him like a pet until the last battle, which is the sort of Armageddon that they talk about in the series. Or do they let him go free and try to help him along? So Moraine was the only active Aes Sedai looking for him to try and help him along and guide him in a productive manner, rather than most Aes Sedai either were just not going to bother worrying about it until they had to, and then there were others that were hunting him and they wanted to cage him up.
I found. Well, no, I mean, before we get into more of the actual storyline, I just wanted to point out and for those of you who have read more, because both of you read a lot more than I have of Jordan, but it sounds like there's an inn called the Nine Rings. There's a Mr. Underhill. There's a place called Andor. There's a magical item that corrupts its user. I mean, I don't think he's necessarily copying. These are things that you just might have the idea for, but that's interesting.
There are a lot of parallels in the story that I think are found in high fantasy everywhere to varying degrees. And I think if you have read Tolkien, it's really hard, and any serious body of work of that quality especially, it's hard to read that and not have that indirectly influence some of your story choices, some of maybe how your magic works, or the sorts of things that maybe you'll put in your world. I know names are a big one when I am playing around designing worlds for a book I'm working on. I notice a lot of influences from Tolkien, Jordan, Sanderson, all.
And that's not necessarily negative. I mean, it's just recognizing we
absolutely
use some of the same ingredients in our soup, right?
Exactly. When the story starts, he's 17 or 18. Yeah. And I would actually
really wants to follow him.
Yeah, of course not. He's 21 or 22 by the series end. Yep. I would also even draw a bit of a parallel to Aragorn, who, at least from what I remember, was a somewhat reluctant king of Gondor, in the same way that Rand really did not want to take the mantle of the Dragon Reborn.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that goes into these deep archetypes and great stories that keep resurfacing, which are why Tolkien and Jordan and other writers are appealing in their time to people. So, what do you guys want to talk about? No, go ahead. I was just going to say, Hawk, what do you think? Shall we just have a kind of a discussion of pros and cons? Okay. Well, you want to make some more comments, Corey, or about?
Yeah, and the non-political answer or theory I would put out there is he was deeply inspired by the concepts of yin and yang of Hinduism and rebirth, and this very masculine versus feminine to make a complete whole. And so I think that's a dynamic we see societally for hundreds of years, more likely thousands, all across the world. And regardless of your sex, those important elements of masculine and feminine were the whole concept of Rand not going crazy from mute channeling and wiping out the world. He needed that balance because he was sort of earlier on the like purely the archetypal male and pure masculine traits that sort of led to him being somewhat tyrannical at times and doing despicable things sometimes.
Well, that's interesting to me because it's not the first time we see. I mean, like in Frank Herbert's 1965 novel Dune, you have the Bene Gesserit. You have again, magic is more commonly practiced by women, right? And a male, it's not as common, and so it's an anomaly, and so that's interesting that this is picked up in Jordan as well.
Mm-hmm. And Jordan has a really clear reason for why that is, right? It's
whereas
the men went off like a loose cannon, and the consequence of that is they were all driven mad because they were being too aggressive, too impatient. Some of these sorts of negative results of their half of the source and the source material.
Right.
That was part of it. But it really was just the backlash of the Dark One, this evil bile that, it expressed itself differently. Rand was Luce Theron was coming into his mind, and they were having conversations and arguments and all sorts of unpleasantness of having another individual in your head. And that was a common thing, but there were others where they just go mad and lay waste, not because of other lives intruding into their own.
I found a very interesting article for someone like me who's a duffer who doesn't know Jordan as well as he ought to, and it's on Tor.com, and this is about 5 years ago by Michael Livingston. I'll post it to the notes, but it's the title of the article is Robert Jordan, America's Tolkien, and he basically says he's kind of responding to an earlier assertion in 2005 that Lev Grossman of Time magazine declared that George R.R. Martin was the American Tolkien. You may remember, people have said that in the past. But this author, Michael Livingston, he says that George R.R. Martin isn't the American Tolkien. Robert Jordan is. And what he says, which is interesting when we're just talking about like not just influence, but more about like what niche does Tolkien occupy in our, in kind of fantasy. And he's saying that he has this essay where he says that James Oliver Rigney Jr., writing as Robert Jordan, created a work of literature that is best understood through the lens of Tolkien's own creative project because it's the most prominent and successful American response to Tolkien's masterwork. Because Tolkien he was a philologist. He loved words, right? So he created the book The Hobbit out of one word, Hobbit, which he wrote on the back of a blank page while he was grading papers, which, can I just say, I hate grading papers too. So anyway, but like he created a world out of a word. I mean, he had been working during the Great War, but he was in World War I in the trenches. But now this kind of started to take on flesh. And this essay, I won't read a lot of it for sake of time, but basically says that Tolkien, and I know like your dad has mentioned this several times, like there's very few fantasy authors who actually start with words and work their way out into, from a language to a world to, it's kind of subcreation. And he says that there's a lot of commonality with Jordan because, you look at how Tolkien's experience, his writing was a work rooted in his experiences of the First World War. And apparently Robert Jordan, or his real name there, Rigby, had been in Vietnam and had served 2 tours in Vietnam. And so he had been through war that had shaped him as well. And that he also, it says in here, he says, it isn't until we get to the release in 1990 of The Eye of the World that I feel we can really begin to see someone taking up Tolkien's flag with authority. And he says, before that, you had Terry Brooks with Shannara, you had Donaldson with Lord Fell's Bane, but nobody was really up to par. And he said, but the Wheel of Time series is a true successor to the kind of mythically philological trail of creation. In other words, anchored in places and names. Like, no, but that may be a very different situation entirely to talk about. But that, like Tolkien's Middle Earth, the world of the wheel is a myth behind myths. The wondrous age of legends, the far past of Jordan's plot lines in the Wheel of Time, is our mythically Atlantean past, just as surely as is Tolkien's story of the fall of Numenor from the Silmarillion. Again and again in Jordan's work, we see the same kind of mythological revision that is the hallmark of Tolkien's work. And then he goes on to refer to, for example, Jordan's Arthur Pendraig, which is completely a
Arthur Pendragon.
Right.
Yeah. And there's a lot of that you find in there. Yeah. I'd also like to point out that the time period of the main novels is literally called the Third Age.
Wow. Interesting. But that's, in some ways, it shouldn't surprise us because, I mean, what we call the Middle Ages is called the Middle Ages because it's between the ancient times of the Greeks and the Romans and the modern age. So in a way, we live in the Third Age too.
Yeah.
So you enjoy, can I just ask Drake for one more thing here? You enjoy Jordan's writing more so than Tolkien. And just wanting to be fair and give you the opportunity to share, why do you think that Jordan, I mean, clearly grabbed your imagination? Why is that? I mean, they share some similarities, but there's differences too.
Absolutely. And that's something I've actually discussed with my dad on occasion. Well, I say discussed. I argued because I was 14, but I found the perspective of Jordan's work being a more limited with perspective with more of an stronger internal monologue and less of this, what I felt in Tolkien's writing was this sort of high above overhead look at the story. And I've read the Silmarillion much more than the Lord of the Rings, so that's worth noting. I just found the writing up until around book 6, I found it more engaging, and I liked the details. It described individual things, small things I felt much better, and just helped paint a much richer picture of characters, clothing, rooms, and buildings, for me at least, than much of what Tolkien wrote. Tolkien sort of compelled me on a very grand epic journey from high above, as if I was sort of, taking a plane over a city. I'd get this grand view of something, but I didn't feel the same sense of grittiness from it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, what is everybody else's perspective? For those who have read both.
I pretty much Yeah.
That's
No. Oh yeah. No. I'm saying like. Hey,
everything's.
yeah. Also. Because just because I haven't read kind of how
That's all. I read. Remembered.
when you retire.
And to get by
The fourth one's kind of bad.
and the fifth. Part of it was just. I just found his. Plot thinking.
Point that we.
Well, you can write about.
So one of the there's 2 points there I think that are important. Given the perspective Jordan's writing in, I think it's understandable for the perspectives to be more juvenile than Tolkien, given who Tolkien was, his English acumen, which is something that very few authors come anywhere near to. And I don't think that's necessarily the worst thing ever, but yeah, I would agree that Jordan's writing was much more simple and I would argue maybe even straightforward, but
Lots of other. Only near Tolkien. Not what I was. So. And still, when I've gone back, the reading level, but the. Not that that you can tell the exact.
Okay.
But Guardians of Flame, that was another. But the writing was.
One of the things Jordan is famous for, and I admit this happily, even as a fan, is getting off on these long, pointless tangents.
Many others do.
Oh,
that.
but he wanted to do 13 books. And unfortunately, a lot of it is filler and it isn't very interesting or thought provoking. I have said at times that to people interested in picking up the series, that maybe after about the third book, you should just read like the first third and then the end.
So I guess my question for you, Jen Drake, would be: do you think that? I mean, I don't know if he could have stopped after one, because, in a sense, his idea, right, his setting, almost requires it to be a series, doesn't it? To take a long time to be able to tell this.
Oh, absolutely. Otherwise, it would just be a series of exposition.
Yeah.
He does plenty of that to begin with. If he tried to really just describe this world directly, it would be beyond boring and like, oh, these are great ideas. Let me scribble down a note so that I can, incorporate that into my world, rather than it being part of a story.
Okay, but he is trying to kind of have this, like, ancient history, as it were, of our world, or some kind of Atlantean connection. Is that right?
It's very much supposed to be this version of our world.
Okay, interesting. I mean, I think
Brooks.
Mm-hmm.
They
Yeah.
went through a lot.
Right. And it's like his first book was more maybe influenced by Tolkien in a more direct way, but then afterwards he becomes a bit more original, like in the second book. Would you agree, Drake?
Yeah, I'd also note that it sort of is this tour de France of his world, and a lot of it doesn't really serve the story, just because it's about this world and this universe he's created, and not just the story.
So world building was very important to Jordan in the same way that it was for Tolkien. Can we say that?
I would say that's probably fair. I don't know for sure, given the many, many pages Tolkien wrote at length about his world building.
Right, but Jordan has his was about. Right, really. That was where I. All these world. And what he does.
That Homer was. I make reference. Shakespeare, a great writer, great author. No, and they don't know. They don't know, but yeah, the this is that we make out. But then I don't read Shakespeare on a regular basis, but I would read, and I feel like Tolkien has modern people because of the fact that man who's during Pacific Catholic, all this giant epic So when you talk about Robert, the popularity, I'm helping some homeless people. They were willing to buy Jordans, but unlike the fit. So I mean, all out money broke
Yeah.
series.
Yeah, what we should always pay attention to, because whether or not we necessarily would rate them in the same whatever when you're comparing authors, it is good to notice and pay attention to what people read, what they're really interested in, and kind of what sticks with them. Anthony and Gary, I would like to make sure that we include your opinion. We kind of finish up our discussion of Robert Jordan and then move on to I would propose the next letter of Tolkien. So Anthony,
Just
any last comments you'd like to make? Yep.
I think world build. Come on, a new land. Yeah, I think.
I think you were muted out there, Brian, but yeah, I just got a couple of things, very
Yes, thank
quickly. First of all, I've never read anything by Jordan in my life, but I do realize, like Tolkien, he's got his own TV series, and I'll take a look at it. I think it just started, Wheel of Time on Amazon Prime. But I do agree with one thing Drake said about the Silmarillion, which is third person, and I had a difficult time getting through it, which is not the same as The Hobbit or the Lord of the Rings, which Lord of the Rings just, to me, engages me like no other work at the time. And there's a lot of dialogue, there's a lot of personal observations from the characters and that type of thing. So yeah, the Silmarillion to me was just a backdrop for the world he had created. And he did create quite a world, and it sounds like Jordan did also. And the last thing before I let you go is I don't think we should forget that they were men of their times. I mentioned that Tolkien was World War II. He was actually World War I, which was completely a different. Yeah, well, anyway, I'm not blaming you for that, but before and after World War I mean, you had ages, they were different eras, actually. And World War I was just a demarcation line, and so many things happened because of that. A lot of them negative. Most of them were negative, I think. And Jordan was, a Vietnam vet. Different era, different people. If you're not as well, really into that stuff like some of us, I think I can see where he would appeal to a more modern audience. So that's all I got.
Thank you, Gary. Drake, any last comment on this?
I don't know. I would just like to say something along the lines of there have some amazing similarities, I think, in the worlds and some of the world building there and this epic scope of their stories. But I at least have found them to be almost diametrically opposed in their storytelling. And I don't know if that's fair or not. I haven't read the Lord of the Rings trilogy in the better part of a decade, and I read The Hobbit in 4th grade. So it's been.
But he has played in the.
Ask philosophy, trying to get together middle age from Europe, how that works. Because about where the language was with his novel and philosophical points, because polytheist ideas, Catholic filter, how to that common something Western background, and you're using philosophy about incarnation and
culture.
But well, I'm not saying.
I think Corey's point, I think, has to do with blending together very different elements. So that point is taken. I mean, my answer to that would be that what Jordan represents would be something that can be really interesting, which is a fusion, and looking at, because fantasy can do that, right? You can blend things together that we're not always equally, held or whatever. You can say, what would this look like if? I do think the one very different outcome is that with Tolkien, in his essay on fairy stories, one key concept to Tolkien is the eucatastrophe. The eucatastrophe is this concept that there is this happy ending that we long for, but it has to go through believable a period in which it seems like there's no hope, but there is a conclusion to that. And whereas with a cyclical view of time, you can't, I don't think you could get to that, because you would always be like, well, we've triumphed over, the Dark One for now. And then, whereas even in Tolkien, where you have, they vanquish, Sauron for a time or whatever, and then we have to face him again later. Ultimately, there is this sense in a Western view, whether you call it Ragnarok or Judgment Day, there is an end to that linear point of time. And I don't think that you can do that when you bring in an Eastern view. But right. Yeah.
Oh, correct me if I'm...
In a sense, and they do, but a more general point, I think Jordan does a very interesting job of balancing this hopelessness of everything that's happened is going to happen again, and we can't stop it, with we can end this, and we can win.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then he does a big point about breaking the wheel, to quote Game of Thrones. And in the end, Rand stops the cycle of the Dragon Reborn being reborn, and having to face the Dark One over and over again.
That is fascinating. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Was about.
Some sort.
Yeah, but their nirvana was basically a state of nothingness. That's really
Well, we're gonna say about it.
Can I ask if we're able to, if everybody's happy with it, if we can move on to the next Tolkien letter?
And I've actually got to go, but thank you for having me.
Thank you, Drake.
Yeah, thank you, Drake.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye. Okay, so last time we read letter 192. So if Hawk, if you think that's a good point, we can move on to 193. 193.
That account wants to.
Gary, do you have a copy by chance?
I just got it.
Oh, great. Would you feel too bashful to read, or?
I'm looking because I just searched for it, and so far I've got the summary.
I've got
So-
it in front of me.
Well, we can let somebody else start, and then if you want to, we can always.
Ryan, are you not able to hear?
Hello.
I can hear you.
At least he has a hard have a loud voice.
Go ahead. I just wanted to involve Gary more. That's all.
Well, that's okay. I don't mind listening. I don't feel slighted in the least. I'm just looking, I guess, at a different place for it right now.
Letter 193. Letter 2. I've asked for Tolkien accent. Tolkien said, speaking accent to technical language, more or less consistent alterations of the vowel/consonants received English. I should say that in the cases you query, no accent differentiation is desirable. For instance, it would probably be better to avoid certain actual or conventional features of modern vulgar English in representing orcs. Dropping H's. These are
H's.
H's. Right. These are, I think, not dropped in the text, but of course, for most people, accent, as defined above, is confused with impressions of different tonation, articulation, and tempo. You will, I suppose, have to use such means. Sound nasty. I have no doubt. I have no doubt that if this history were real, all users of the common speech would reveal themselves by their accent, differing in place, people, and rank. But that cannot be represented. CS is turned into English.
Which English accent is it that uh, from Pygmalion where they're trying to turn the woman into a lady?
Cockney?
Yeah, a little Cockney.
No,
I can imagine what Tolkien thought about a Cockney accent from a troll.
Henry Higgins, it hardly never happens here.
It is not, I think, necessary. I paid great attention to such linguistic differentiation as possible, diction, idiom, and so on. I doubt if much more can be important.
Important.
Imported. Sorry. Can't read apparently. Except insofar as the individual actor represents his feeling for the character in tone and style. As Minas Tirith is at the source of common speech, it is to common speech as London is to modern English and standard of comparison. None of its inhabitants have an accent in terms of vowels, etc. Rohirrim, no doubt, as our ancient English ancestors in a similar state of society, spoke at their own tongue, with a slower tempo and more sonorous articulation than modern urbans. But I think it is safe to represent them when using common speech, as they practically always do, for obvious reasons. Best, possibly a little too good, learnedly, somewhat slower and more careful than natives.
You need somebody to translate for you. You have your cell phone. Is that how it works?
But
You're walking through the orcs.
That is a nicety safely neglected and not always true. Theoden was born in Gondor. Common speech was the domestic language of the Golden Hall in his father's day. Return of the King.
Wait a minute. If Gondor, if the so are the hobbits a derivative of Gondor? Is that what they're implying?
I think so.
Do you hear me, Brian?
I can hear you.
Okay.
I don't think so. I think when we're talking about accents of the common speech, right? Because, right, so the common speech is Westron,
Yeah.
and that would definitely come from Gondor, because remember the Shire was a gift from Gondor to the people of to the Hobbit, when there still was a king ruling over the North and South kingdoms, and their own. When you look at the origin of the Hobbits' names, they have an origin that's different than common speech, right? You have all the names; they sound very different, right? And you can even look up kind of more Hobbitish versions of what those names actually sounded like. So Baggins was something else, etc. They're rendered into common speech. This would be similar to, yeah, so kind of a basic English received English, so similar to London or whatever. So I think he's saying that that it's he doesn't seem to be too concerned about, yeah, but it should sound slower when the Rohirrim are talking, because they represent a pre-Gondorian society of people.
Lower, kind of like the South.
No, I think because he knows, like Anglo-Saxon. I mean, the more agrarian you are, the more your society is based on agriculture. You're going to speak. You're not going to be in a hurry, right? Just in general.
Yeah.
But nowadays, time is money. We've got sound bites, and things have to happen fast. And if you take your time and you think, and you say, well, I was going to say, and by that time it's too late. I mean, I face this all the time. I've got 5 daughters, and they're all talking. By the time I think of something to say, it's moved on to the next topic, so I'm lost.
There's definitely less of a priority on perfection these days.
Yes.
Fast talking, next thing, culture of doing rather than
Thinking.
but that's a kind of a little bit of a tangent of mine.
I think the Ents would agree with you, Anthony.
Yes,
Treebeard would agree.
I would probably fit in nicely with the Ents or the Hobbits.
You know, in Star Trek DS9, I always laugh when Jarek has the doctor and he's talking to the doctor and he says, you guys bolt down your food. You never understand what it means to sit and have a meal.
Yeah, and savor the bite.
Yeah, you sit and enjoy yourself and talk. And this is coming from a Cardassian, right? Talking to Starfleet about how they're being too fast when they have their meals or whatever. I always thought it was hilarious.
I like that. Yeah, I think it's a really fascinating question, isn't it? Because we just take it for granted that that maybe the Hobbits, some of them sound like there's from Somerset, where you have cider, and that accent, of course, which we get from the movies. I mean, I didn't think that way, of course, when I had read the book beforehand, but he does include in his some of the ways that the words are written for the Hobbits, definitely a more, quaint kind of, rural kind of speech, and so that should sound different than someone from Minas Tirith. But anyway,
Well,
that's all I had to say.
vowel differences and so forth. Usually, it's just me, but in fantasy, the tendency to write the language looks good on paper, but doesn't necessarily sound good when you try to read it. So
That is true.
That's a difference that Tolkien was very picky about the sound of it, whereas how many writers do it by sound, like perfect pitch and. I mean, he was a linguist. He was a linguist, for heaven's sake. That's what I'm saying.
Sure. Well, if we don't have any other comments, we can move on to letter
Got a
194.
comment?
Yeah.
Well, I found something. I found something interesting. Tolkien himself on Dwarvish voice. A note on Dwarvish voices, which is from Middle Earth.
Oh, please
edited
do.
by,
Go ahead.
Edited by Carl F. Hostel. Tolkien himself kind of goes into how would the dwarves would have sounded, and he basically says that phonetically they were acute and could pronounce learned languages. Voices were very deep, laryngeal coloration, and they among themselves spoke in a laryngeal whisper. That's I don't know. It's kind of interesting. Like, book just came out last year. Peter Jackson couldn't have it on hand. He didn't have the rights to it. I wonder, dwarves, dwarvish voices in the films necessarily are different, or should sound like what Tolkien would have imagined them, because they seem to all have Scottish accents, especially Balin from The Hobbit. Hey, how you doing,
Well,
lad?
I mean, that's because the actors were from Scotland.
Yeah, well,
Right.
that too. Yeah,
Well, red hair, right? The red hair, the beard, the reddish, always kind of makes us think of Scotland, doesn't it?
Or Ireland.
And Ireland, yeah. Yeah, I was actually I was happy that Anthony read that, because I did find letter 193 and all of his letters online after we had our little conversation here. But its language is extremely interesting, and the common speech, as he talks about it, how different people from different backgrounds speak it, is even in the common speech is different from a practical standpoint. And Tolkien would have known this from the different types of accents, from the British Isles, Scotland, even the different accents in England itself and Wales and Ireland. So how people pronounce it. And he had to be aware of that, I think.
Oh, Welsh Gaelic is kind of the Irish and the Scottish people, right? Gaelic. And
Yeah,
Tolkien
I guess, they're.
Tolkien wasn't big on the Gaelic. He's kind of funny because he liked it, but then he got mad about the fact that he couldn't read it properly. Something he couldn't
No, I mean, it
digest
wasn't the language itself. But it's it's funny because what did Winston Churchill say about English? That we're two separate peoples divided by a common language.
Yes.
And that's true. And I had an extremely funny experience, and I'll try to be as quick as I can. That once upon a time I was teaching scuba out of the shop in Okinawa that was patronized by these jet teachers, which means Japanese English teacher, and they were from all places that taught English, New Zealand, or that spoke English, New Zealand, Canada, Australia, England itself. And one of the ladies was from Birmingham, England, not Alabama. And she, basically what the Japanese did was the teacher would read a passage, and then the Japanese instructor would actually talk about it with the kids, and he was versed in English. But anyway, she read this passage out of some book, I don't know what it was, and all the kids were looking at her really quizzically, and just strange looks on their face and everything like that. And the teacher said, let me stop you for a second, because I need to talk to the class. And he didn't know that she spoke some Japanese. Anyway, he told the students that this lady is from England, and therefore she doesn't know how to speak English. Honest to God, she was quite upset about that at a party we were having at the dive shop that night. So anyway, that's
pretty funny.
all I got. Go ahead.
Well, our learning of language is never a linear sort of fashion, no matter as children. So we always get stuff that probably isn't really grammatically correct, but
Yeah.
somehow we pass it on to each other in conversation. So
I do want to make one comment. It's interesting in letter 193 that Tolkien says that for the orcs, it'd be probably better to avoid certain features of modern vulgar English, such as the dropping of H's, where you just kind of drop the H off the word.
Oh, okay.
But I don't know. I think Tolkien possibly is breaking his own rule here. And I'm going to quote from an article called, this is Tolkien's use of the word garn to typify a motley
Garn?
crew of reprobates. Yes, garn. Listen. So the word garn is a bit of Cockney dialect, G-A-R-N, that Tolkien puts into the mouths of a number of characters of less than sterling repute. The renowned showman W.S. Gilbert in Gilbert and Sullivan has a sentence that is an excellent illustration of the type of person who might use garn in his play The Hooligan. In it, his character says, "Gone! I don't want no wash. Should never freshen the bloke yet." In Pygmalion, by George Bernard Shaw, garn is the word that prompts Professor Higgins to say that Eliza speaks a sort of curbstone English that is going to keep her in the gutter to the end of her days. The reaction of the lyrical Professor Higgins in My Fair Lady is perhaps somewhat better known. It's ow and gone that keeps her in her place, not her wretched clothes and dirty face. The characters whom Tolkien is keeping in their place are, these are the characters that say garn. The orc Shagrat in chapter 10 of book 4, The Choices of Master Samwise. A nameless small orc tracker in chapter 2 of book 6, The Land of the Shadow. The largest and most evil-looking ruffian of the crew that came out to meet Frodo in the company of the Green Dragon in chapter 8 of book 6, The Scouring of the Shire. And Ted Sandyman, a hobbit of undoubted ill repute in chapter 8 of book 6, The Scouring of the Shire. In fact, just before Sandyman says garn, Sam Gamgee comments that Sandyman apparently has no time for washing. So I think that's interesting. So anyway, you have to differentiate the English a little bit to be able to get across a certain kind of.
Well, isn't that kind of like sometimes Americans, we have words from other languages that really, I mean, obviously there's a few French words that over the time have kind of broken in, but in the slang and so on. But yeah, I don't know, look at the Lord of the Rings. Do you want it to feel so different from English that it's exotic, or as Tolkien is saying, is he puts a little bit in there because that's essentially the world he comes from, and we kind of share a little bit in that. I don't know.
I think you should put it in there. I mean, I think it does add a layer. Even in the movies, right? When they're like, "Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys."
Yeah, I love that.
Lines like that are classic. And so if we're like, "Oh, well, we can't make it sound like people nowadays. We have to make it all sound archaic," I think that would lose. I would lose a lot of people. And so I think it's fine using that. I just think that it's interesting that he says in this letter that he shouldn't do it.
Yeah, I agree with you. That really helps, the story set the stage, or makes it richer.
Okay.
Excuse me. I think we lost Brian or something.
I'm back.
Okay.
Having a call.
What page?
You wanna
I
read
mean,
letter
what are we reading
194?
now? 194. Want me to read? Yes. Vote on that.
Gary, did you want to read a little bit?
I mean, I could. I would probably put you to sleep, but.
Well, why don't you? Is it a longish letter? Let's look here a minute.
No.
Yeah, it is kind of long.
Why don't we? Could you read the first paragraph, the first half there, and then Corey could take the second half. How about that?
Okay, I think Corey will probably do a better job, but that's okay. 6 November 1956, dear Tiller, Terence Tiller, who lives in Oxford, and it's about Lord of the Rings. And he says, excuse me, I have not had time for more than 2 rapid readings of the 3 episodes that you sent me, but I suppose it is now or never if any comment is to be of practical use. I'm not offering any criticism of detail. The objects you had in making this version seem fairly clear, and granted their value or legitimacy, I do not think that they should have been much better achieved. I think that they could have been much better achieved. I wish your efforts all success. But as a private conversation between you and me, I could wish you had perhaps time to spare to tell me why this sort of treatment is accorded in the book and what value it has. And third, for myself, I do not believe that many, if any, listeners who do not know the book will thread the plot or grasp at all what is going on. And the text is, necessarily in the space, reduced to such a simple, even simple-minded terms that I find it hard to believe it would hold the attention of the third.
And the third there, I think, refers to the BBC third.
Okay.
That's a different, it'd be a radio channel. The third BBC radio channel. They have different ones. So.
And this was at a time when the only thing they had was the BBC. So,
Right. So it's called the third program, apparently. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Yep. That's all they have. Corey, you want to continue?
Okay. Here is a book very unsuitable for dramatic or semi-dramatic representation. If that is attempted, it needs more space, a lot of space. It is sheerly impossible to plot the 2 books in the allotted time, whether the object be to provide something in itself entertaining in the medium, or to indicate the nature of the original, or both. Why not then turn it down as unsuitable if more space is not available? Is he saying that he doesn't want it to go to theater? Doesn't want it in theater? Is that what's talking about? I'm trying to understand.
This is for the.
Oh.
Yeah, it's for the radio, but yeah, it's an adaptation to the radio. I don't know.
Sounds like he's saying it's too short.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not enough room. I remain, of course, flattered and pleased that my book should receive this attention, but I still cannot help wondering why this form. Personally, I think it requires rather the older art of the reading mime than the more nearly dramatic, which results in too great an emphasis on dialogue, mostly with its setting removed. Take 2 points. The episode of the corpse candles is cut down to ineffectiveness. A crucial moment when Gollum nearly repents disappears in a mirror, and so Gollum found them. Not sure. 3, etc. 3:12. I don't. In this way, both the scenery and the characters become flat, without precision and color, and without motives or conflicts. I cannot help think that the longer actual passage read as a necklace upon a thread of narration, which the narrator might occasionally venture an interpretation of more than the mere plot events, would or might prove both interesting to the listeners and fairer to the author. But as I've said, I lack the experience in the medium, and this is in any case no criticism of your text, but a sighing for something quite different. A moon, no doubt. Final query: in a tale not conceived dramatically, but, for the lack of a precise term, epically dramatized, unless the dramatizer given or takes liberties as an independent person, I feel you have a hard task. Yeah, Jackson had a bit of a struggle too to try to figure out how in the world he was going to turn Lord of the Rings into something, because Tolkien had said that his medium had been literature or the word. Since he's a philologist, words are essentially like a duck swimming in a pond for Tolkien, but when it went to anything else, felt that it was insufficient.
But he wasn't totally averse to rights.
Well, he
to-
wasn't adverse to it. It's just that he didn't do very well in that medium, is what he was saying. That it wasn't. So, I don't know if he was saying no, it can't fit. It just
Yeah.
that he couldn't
But
make
it has
it
to be
fit.
done right.
Yeah.
World building. Up to. But, you know, there's a
Well,
lot.
yeah, he was niggling with it for how many years? How many years did it take him to finally finish after? Yeah, I mean, though.
over a decade.
Oh, it
50.
was. Yeah, and books were selling in the '60s, right? Late '60s,
That's when they really became.
right? And I don't know. Wasn't he still alive then?
Yeah, he died in 72 or something like that. But
73.
Tolkien was, he was an author. He was not a script writer or anything like that. And he didn't understand, I mean, I don't think he would have been successful adapting his stories to that medium, and certainly not to, the movies or
Yeah.
even TV. So, I mean, think about it. If you had to adapt Tolkien to Lord of the Rings to like Peter Jackson did, I don't know how many people could do that.
Well, maybe that's
Even experienced people.
maybe that's the reason why Amazon's series is going to be probably better, is because in some ways there's a lot of vague things about that, and they've got more of a what is it they call it, creative.
Creative license?
Yeah, they have a bit more creative license because things aren't so hammered down, with nails. Because some areas of his works, man, you can't really do much with it because it's not going to fit properly or do what it's supposed to. So I don't know. I'm glad that Amazon has this chance, but I do not trust modern cinema to do much with it.
Yeah.
I'm a pretty cynical person about it. Yes.
Brian, we
We
can't.
can't hear you, Brian.
I think your microphone's muted.
Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think Tolkien himself is saying that, isn't he? Where he says, I feel you have a very hard task because it's, he's saying at the end, can any tale not conceived dramatically, not written for radio, right? Or movies or whatever, can epically be dramatized, unless the dramatizer takes liberties as an independent person. So I think that is the risk that you run. Some things that are conceived in theater or in radio do best the way they were planned. And I agree with Gary. I don't think that Tolkien would have done a great job adapting his work either. But I think when you look at it, you realize that it's never going to be the same, but that it can be done with integrity. That's what I'm hoping, right? That creatively, with integrity, you be faithful to the tone, the atmosphere, and I think they'll get the scale. But the question remains whether or not they'll be able to take that. And I think he compares his writing to, it's like actual passages read as a necklace upon a thread of narration. So he's definitely seeing, I mean, when you write, and I mean, I don't have a lot of experience with this, but it just seems like in writing fiction, it just takes a long time to build things, right? So you're really building it piece by piece. And it's only as you go on, you start to see the whole structure. And that's not how cinema is done.
Yeah, it's a visual medium compared to literature. Is it sound based, right? I mean, in our head, right? And it's very different, linear. It's left to right.
Right.
Yeah, and you can also, both in radio and television and film, you can only put in so much that will stay in the audience's eyes still.
Kind of like the original Dune movie. It had so much history, they tried to
Oh,
slap it on the front end, and everybody's bored by the time the first character comes out because it takes a half an hour just to learn all the history. That's I just couldn't imagine what Tolkien would think of that. I wanted the Silmarillion so bad to be and published, not punished, published. Anyways, point is that I
I
just are we reading another one?
Well, no, I think we should stop, and I think we should conclude with ideas about who would be a logical choice for the author to bring in next month. I mean, we could do Terry Brooks, but I just wanted to make sure we pick another author who came after Tolkien and has some relationship with him in terms of fantasy writing.
I think Terry Brooks is
So-
an interesting pick. I don't know how many people. I mean, if for my generation, I don't know. Same with you, about the same age, right? Brian, they're
I don't know. You said okay, boomer to me once.
well.
I think I said-
Please don't hold that against me. Anyways, but we're closer. We're close. So we read Terry Brooks
Yes.
early on when we were kids. I know I did, anyways, in high school. So, or Tolkien influence, because his first couple of novels were by Tolkien. Kind of did finally diverge later, right?
Yeah. So that's my question: is Terry Brooks? Would that be a good one? I'd like to get Gary's input and also Anthony's to see if there's somebody else that they wanted to mention, because it'd be nice if it is an author that you've read.
Yeah, I haven't read Terry Brooks. The only thing I knew is once I've done a lot of things in my life, but I worked for a place that distributed books and periodicals, and we got a lot of paperback Terry Brooks books, and they were very popular. This was back in the 1980s, early
Yep.
80s.
With the Brothers Hildebrand jacket illustrations.
Yeah. So I'll try to read up on it and find out what he's all about. And
It gives you a month. You could check out the Sword of Shannara.
the sort of what
Shannara.
you're breaking up. Oh, Sonara. Okay.
Shannara.
Yeah.
Look up Terry Brooks and you'll.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, everything I learned about Robert Jordan is I went to IMDb and found out about Wheel of Time, and Amazon has done 3 episodes now.
Well, any thoughts, Anthony?
Yes, I was thinking the next logical choice for Joe. It's popular in today's world, as well as like Jordan, he was American Tolkien. I've also have some other authors that offer, like, you ever read Terry Goodkind? I started listening to an audiobook Truth series.
They tried to do a Seeker television series that was based off of that book series.
Yeah.
I read most of Terry Goodkind's series. I don't remember. I quit reading them because they never seemed to finish. Just like Gordon, like
Also, Raymond E. Feist, who wrote Rift War Saga. Dragonland. Those.
anybody know what's popular now? Fantasy. I don't know because I'm too much in the past now. Seriously,
Sanderson would be my one that I
Yeah, we
know
could do
of.
we could do Sanderson. That's another good choice.
I thought we did Sanders.
We
talked
did
about-
already.
Oh yeah, we did kind of talk about.
Yes, we did. That was our last meeting. We compared them. Yep.
Christopher Paolini, he wrote Curtains.
I don't remember the one with dragons.
Yeah,
Lots of dragons. Yeah. Paolini, I mean, he wrote a book to essentially save the family farm. All the money he makes. It's amazing how quick he got a book out. He became a writer at 19. Popular at 19.
Oh, shame.
Was this the guy who wrote Aragon?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, I think maybe what we should do is put some names here together, and then maybe we could put it on Tolkien Scholars website and get people to vote on which one they'd like next.
How would you do that? Just like a
Let's be yeah, Hawk can do it. Let's do this though. Let's prepare to be ready to discuss either George R.R. Martin or Terry Brooks. That way,
okay.
Gary, you can if you want to get a
Yeah, I'll check them both out. I'll check them
Sword
both
of
out.
Shannara is an easy read. It goes by pretty quickly. So
Okay.
Yeah, I wonder if it's
yeah.
Well, you
Yeah.
almost can call the main characters hobbits. Kind of funny. Of Terry Brooks.
Well,
Yeah.
we'll talk about that next month. I'm surprised he never got in trouble for copyright.
Copyright problems.
plagiarism.
Our next meeting looks to be third Saturday in December, be the 18th. So that's when we'll be meeting next, just so you all know.
December 18th.
Yep. And I'll send you
Everybody's
this
going
up
to be
here.
around, are they?
I'm a little concerned how the audio came out because Sarah said it was a bit scratchy. Tried cleaning it up.
Some of us were breaking.
Well, I was trying to adjust the noise filter so that it wasn't so echoey.
But breaking up is hard to do. That's what I've heard.
Oh, God.
Did you ever hear the spoof version of that song when it broken up? So before you were born, there used to be only one phone company. Right?
Ma Bell or something.
It was AT&T. They called it Ma Bell. Yeah. So and it had a complete monopoly on it. And eventually the government broke them up into TV bands. But as that was happening, a song started doing the rounds on all the radio stations. Don't take my phone away from me. Go MCI, not AT. Breaking up is hard on you.
I feel like that song would have been made.
Well, it was based on an older song.
Oh, really?
Right, but it was replacing the lyrics.
Oh,
need a Spice Girl.
So, for example, when Iran had the hostages.
During the Iran hostage crisis. Oh my God!
And all these.
I remember that.
Remember that? Yeah.
That could never happen today.
Oh yeah.
Those like in Back of the Future.
Yeah, this was on all the radio stations. Okay, so we got that. Brian, I hope you get well soon. Let me know when we should continue our world's slowest end crawl pub. It's the world's slowest pub crawl called.
What do you guys do?
Yeah, we go to a different pub each time and try a couple of flights.
Don't be hasty.
We're definitely not being hasty.
He's already taller. If he gets any taller, what are we going to do with him? He won't fit in the video camera.
Well,
That's why I have to
Gary,
get the extra wide angle lens.
thank you, Gary, for joining us again.
Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, no worries. I enjoy it.
Good. We'll see you next
Hawk,
month. Yes.
Were there any comments online that you needed to read off? Anything else?
Sarah says the audio fluctuate. I hear some of you very broken, but I can follow the discussion. I kept trying to improve it. So the problem is here's the thing. If you don't speak up, so I have to set the noise threshold at below a certain number of decibels, won't trigger the audio to work. So if you're speaking quietly or your microphone's quiet or something. Now, those of you who are remote, that's not the problem. The problem is the way that because we're a mixture of studio and remote, what happens is if I don't do that, we get both your audio and the microphone picking up your audio, and it
Yeah.
creates an echo,
Yeah.
right? So our recordings all have this horrible echo. So you have to create this filter that says below this decibel, don't record the sound and don't broadcast it. So that's creating a noise gate. You have to get that noise gate so that still hear you on the TV, those of us that are here. The only alternative is, we all have to wear headphones, and that just never works. We've tried that over and over. It's painful
Oh,
to
yeah.
do. So turn the TV down enough that we can still hear you and not pick it up on the mic. But everybody here at the table has to make sure they speak up clearly enough that it goes across the noise gate consistently, because it drop off like this.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to always be in, I'm in speech mode. I must enunciate clearly.
Yeah, Shakespeare.
Project my voice loudly so I can be heard to say, from the back of the line, yes, I'm eligible for food stamps.
Well, I have to say that poor
It's old
Anthony,
for actors. What?
I do have to say poor Anthony is in the same room as Corey and Hawk.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I'm
Indeed.
getting drowned out over here.
All right, man. Well, what we need to do is put the microphone right by you.
Yes.
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 Oh no, he'll have
We
ultimate
do
power.
have clip-on mics,
Oh.
but
Yep.
it is still the same thing where I have to play. Like then what? So then I've done that. Everybody has a clip-on mic. I have to set the noise gate differently for session. So when we were doing regular shows and fundraising, we did that because it was better quality. I had an audio person.
Okay. Well,
That's
keep
the problem. So we're sorry
up
for
the
the
good work,
audio.
Hawk.
What's that?
Yep. Keep up the good work.
Trying to improve.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. Be well.
Yeah, thank
Demarie.
you. Thank you.
All right.
Nobody-
Yay.